Breaking news. Jim Jones and Cameron, the former rulers of Dipset, were recently arrested after a vicious altercation backstage. Is this motivated by money, old grudges, or something else entirely? The truth may be more shocking than you might think. For years, these two have used controversy and disruption to build their empires, but now it's gone too far. You won't believe the information we've uncovered about everything they stood for. The twist is that the struggle wasn't even what everyone had expected. Behind-the-scenes secrets are being exposed. Deceit and treachery and unthinkable actions are emerging, and the consequences could permanently ruin Dipset. Pay close attention, because what follows will make you question everything you've heard about these hip-hop titans. Believe me, this is the story that no one saw coming. Cameron and Jim Jones were supposed to celebrate and have another night of life, but what transpired behind closed doors shocked the rest of the world and left the hip-hop industry in shock. The incident we're going to talk about wasn't just a fight. It was the public breakdown of everything these two have worked so hard to achieve. Let's set the scene. Cameron, the self-declared king of Harlem, and Jim Jones, the fiery, unrepentant man who has been involved in scandals, were supposed to be enjoying their jobs and making money in the industry for years to come. High profile, behind those brilliant lights, something deeper was simmering. Their faces were plastered all over the VIP area, smiling, bottles exploding, and everything on display to realize that these two haven't exactly had the smoothest of relationships. Sure, they were once the foundation of Dipset and a power couple, but beneath the glamour and notoriety, there has always been a simmering tension that no one can ever fully understand. It didn't take long for the two to start fighting backstage, and they weren't just having a small argument. No, this was something far more serious. The words spoken weren't just your typical insults. They were a verbal altercation that escalated into a full-fledged physical conflict, and the public was unprepared for the complete chaos that broke out on the surface. Even though Cameron and Jim Jones were just two men, rap game legends having a great time, it turns out that the same trifecta that has destroyed so many others before them, money, power, and ego, had been there all along with them. Let's take a look back at their lives to see how things quickly got out of control. Cameron and Jim Jones's collaboration in Dip Patet was never completely straightforward. They had their ups and downs, as well as their memorable moments, but if you really look at their lives, you can see that there has always been a deep-seated tension simmering just beneath the surface of all the success. The money and the sordid game of who's receiving what, who's in command, and who's pulling the strings were what actually got things started. But superficial ego conflicts and, you bet it, different future visions were also a factor from the beginning. There has been a sense of rivalry between the two, and let's face it, no one gets as successful as Cameron and Jim Jones without stepping on a few toes along the way. 2. Even though each man had a specific job and set of goals, it was clear that they had different objectives. Cameron wanted to maintain control of the group, while Jim Jones was eager to leave his own legacy. Although they had previously been able to work things out when they fought, this time it was different, and the stakes were higher than before. The fact is that neither man has ever been good at sharing the limelight, and that's when things started to get out of hand. But the thing about these two legends is that, despite their public opinions, they never seemed to get angry. But generally speaking, it felt like a game with fame, drama, and attention as the stakes. This time, however, things were different, so let's go back to the scene. Backstage, the atmosphere is tense and exciting, with people running in all directions to get into position for the act. Everything is set up, including lights, cameras, and flashing fans, and the evening is being filmed as everyone looks for the perfect photo or moment. However, something wasn't right with Cameron and Jim Jones. Their usual companionship had vanished. A few words were exchanged, and then a few more before things started to get out of hand. It was the kind of altercation you only see in movies, with the verbal attacks turning from heated to downright explosive at one point, and the battle swiftly escalated into something much larger, accused of pushing Jim Jones, which resulted in a physical altercation that filled the entire backstage area. Security rushed in as they frantically sought cover, but it was too late. The two had already turned the backstage area into a battlefield, sending chairs, bottles, and other equipment flying as the battle went on. But this wasn't just any fight. Oh no. This was a full-on fight between two people who had been together for years and had built an empire, and it seems that we are finally recognizing the flaws that everyone else had overlooked. The brutality was almost unimaginable, and it marked the end of an era, one of the most violent breakups in hip-hop history, with punches, bodies thrown, people screaming, and the sounds of chaos echoing throughout the auditorium. Irrational, both fans and critics were shocked by what they were hearing. How could Cameron and Jim Jones, two of the biggest names in the industry, be at each other's throats like this, willing to sacrifice everything for a backstage altercation in the blink of an eye, putting their entire careers and legacies at risk? The backstage altercation between Cameron and Jim Jones was not only a scandal, but it was also the stuff of legends. The internet was ablaze with reactions, the streets were ablaze with rumors, and every celebrity reviewer and industry insider had their own opinions. However, as usual, the reality was far more complex than anyone could have predicted, and the public was unaware that the fight was just the beginning of the drama that transpired behind the scenes. Let's look at what happened. If you are familiar with Cameron and Jim Jones's past, you will know that, despite their united front and their cooperation being among the most successful in hip-hop, there was always an underlying strain in their relationship that was never fully resolved. When two enormous egos are in the same organization, problems are bound to arise. But it wasn't just the egos, it was the money, power, and desire for success that drove them both to be passionately protective of their legacy company, which is where things started to go wrong. Let's start with the business side of things after Dip Hit's collapse in the early 2000s. When money is involved, a number of issues arise. As Jim's solo career took off, it became clear that he wasn't content with just being Cameron's right hand man. He had his own goals and aspirations and was more than willing to fight for them. Meanwhile, Jim Jones started to rebel, questioning his place in the organization, and pressure mounted as many began to doubt Cameron's decisions. Their anxiety only increased before there were allegations that Jim Jones was being forced out of Dipset and that Cameron was planning to do this. It wasn't just that there were behind-the-scenes transactions Jim wasn't involved in. Slowly, the flaws became apparent, and the public noticed that the two hadn't been spotted together as frequently. The previous chemistry and fraternity between them had vanished. Something had changed. But what about the battle and disagreement that ultimately defined this entire story? It wasn't just a terrible night where things went out of control. It was the culmination of months or even years of building tension. Jen Jones, perhaps feeling the weight of years of anticipation, finally snapped when the two men were backstage, surrounded by industry people. Fans and staff were frustrated, and he probably thought that this was his chance to gain respect and power, and he wasn't going to let it happen. The argument started as a back and forth over business matters, but Cameron the Alpha wasn't having any of it. He was the boss all his career and wasn't going to let Jim dictate terms. Then the insults came, but you have to understand that these weren't just words. They were extremely personal attacks that went right to the core of who you are. Before anyone could intervene, Cameron is accused of pushing Jim Jones, sending him flying backward. In that one moment, everything changed, and Jim's security rushed in as Cameron's fists flew. However, it was too late. This wasn't just a backstage altercation. It was the end of Dipset as we knew it. The chaos didn't end with the fight, though, because it only got worse from there. Yes, you read correctly. The two men who once dominated the hip-hop scene were now behind bars, reshaping the genre while dealing with the fallout from their acts. Their names, which were once associated with authority and influence, are now featured in every headline, but for all the wrong reasons. The arrest itself was a spectacle, as cameras flashed everywhere, reporters rushed to get statements, and fans poured their thoughts on social media. However, it wasn't just the arrest that got people talking. Who could have predicted that Cameron and Jim Jones would be arrested in 2023? The same street heroes now facing legal repercussions for a backstage altercation. It was the shock of it all twisting into a long story that no one saw coming. And as for the fallout, it was just beginning. Everyone was wondering if Dipset would survive this, if the relationship that bound these two men together could be restored, or if this was the beginning of the end for one of hip-hop's most famous duos. Now, as the dust settles and the streets try to make sense of what happened that night and the true repercussions of the battle, fans are in shock as the events between Cameron and Jim Jones begin to come to light, wondering if the legend of Dipset is truly over or if this turbulent chapter is just the beginning of something even more important. It's hard to predict how this will end, but the shockwaves are already being felt everywhere. Let's start with the legal ramifications. Jim Jones and Cameron were both arrested, and the charges vary depending on the source you're hearing from. But it's clear that this was a full-fledged altercation involving multiple people, security, guards, and witnesses that happened in front of an audience rather than just a backstage altercation. Naturally, people began filming the fight on their phones as soon as it got heated, and the video quickly went viral online, sparking a media frenzy. However, many people might not be aware that the arrest wasn't the worst part of it. The charges that followed caused the real harm, with rumors of violence, property damage, and the potential for a lawsuit from the venue itself, which was allegedly dealing with significant property damage during the commotion of the fight. In an effort to contain that, there is no guarantee that the accusations will stand, but let's face it, even if they are dropped, the damage to the reputations of these two men, who once carried the weight of an entire movement, will be irreversible. They are currently embroiled in a difficult-to-resolve public issue, but what about the long-term financial impact? Cameron and Jim Jones have made millions of dollars as artists and brand builders, but we cannot ignore the fact that their partnerships and investments are now in jeopardy because of corporate sponsors. Record labels and business partners are already closely monitoring these developments, having invested in the Jim Jones, Cameron, and Dipset brands. But now that both men are being dragged through, several sponsors have already distanced themselves. According to people close to the situation, Cameron and Jim Jones are willing to support them and don't want to be associated with such a catastrophe. One anonymous source claims that a large clothing company that had previously worked with Jones was reviewing their agreement in light of the arrest, and Cameron, who is well known for his numerous business endeavors, may have to completely revamp his financial empire. However, let's not forget about the fans, as in the age of social media, when everything is magnified and examined in real time by the public, this is where fans who once praised Dipset's unity and power are now divided. Some are supporting their favorite member, while others are advocating for both. Their response to this has been heated, to put it mildly, and the once unquestioned heritage of Dipset is now being questioned. Some fans are beginning to question whether the dynasty is coming to an end. On the one hand, there are the die-hard Dipset fans who have followed Cameron and Jim Jones since the beginning. They are heartbroken, angry, and confused, and they want to know why their heroes are in this predicament. On the other hand, these fans are also fiercely loyal to their heroes, the men who gave them hits like Sant We Soar High and Dipset Anthem. They may go from ruling the hip-hop scene to this embarrassing mess, but many people are likely to forgive them and remain loyal to them, especially if their favorite rappers can make it seem like a tale of redemption. On the other hand, some fans see this as the final nail in the coffin, and they are choosing to move on social media, which was filled with hateful memes and thought articles about how Cameron and Jim fought. Although some fans have gone so far as to say that this marks the end of an era and the symbolic collapse of the old school era, Jones was a long time coming. The entertainment industry is eager to move on and is already waiting for the next big thing. Will Cameron and Jim Jones be able to recover their careers? It's too soon to tell, but one thing is certain. The public and media will continue to closely examine every decision they make. The real test will be whether the dust settles or if this controversy haunts them for the rest of their lives. We may expect a flurry of media appearances, interviews, and possibly even a lot of work on the part of both men to make amends. But there's no going back once the public's trust has been damaged, which initially made them well known. As always, we'll be here to report on any new developments in this drama. But one thing is certain. The drama, the betrayal, and the controversy will follow these two characters for years to come, and Dimpet will never be the same. And rehabilitate themselves? Or is this the end of Dipset as we know it? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Here are the shocking details of the backstage altercation between Cameron and Jim Jones, the consequences, and more. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date on this major scandal and everything in between. But the story doesn't end here. Rather, it's just the beginning of a tale that has the potential to change hip-hop's course and undermine the legacies of two titans of the genre. In your opinion, is Dipset finished? Share, because we'll be giving you updates on current events as they happen. Don't miss it, and use the alert button to stay up to date on all the internal drama, scandals, and exclusive information that you won't hear anywhere else. Remember that this is just the beginning. and stay tuned for more incredible exposés, shocking revelations, and never-before-seen video that will arrive in a way you won't want to miss.